Great. Thanks, Ben, for getting together. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time. And
No problem.
maybe we can get started by just having you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into thinking about DevOps.
Sure. So, I'm a cloud sort of technology commentator, analyst. I do a bunch of different things. I do a lot of consulting with end users. Do a lot of advisory work with startups. A lot of consulting with vendors. Angel investing, a bunch of different things, and my focus is really about a business. My background is working within business, and isn't technology, and so I've come to technology from a very business centric perspective, and I've always been kind of confused and kind of a little bit frustrated that technologists are so good at talking about technology, but kind of miss that whole people, human process side of things. And so DevOps really excites me because it brings those two worlds together. So that's where my interest lies, and it's been great to see it take rise in the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's definitely come on really strong over the last year. I mean, what are some of the things that you think are the reasons for that? And then, we've spoken in the past about platform versus specific point solutions. What's your view on that as it relates to DevOps? Because I think that might have a lot to do with why it's sort of coming on so strong.
Sure. So I guess in terms of context, it's important to take a step back and look at what's happening more broadly in the global economy and for organisations. And the world's changing rapidly. The GFC, the demand for agility, the pace of change, the rise of the generation, the millennials, changing workforce habits, changing employee expectations. All of these are going together and meaning that organisations need to be agile by default, and they need to be able to turn on a dime. They need to be able to iterate. They need to be able to move super quick. And so, if you're an organisation, traditional organisation, you look at the way you've done things previously, waterfall methodologies, long processes, development removed from the business, removed from operations. Everything's disconnected, so everything has a real time lag. And so, the thing with DevOps is it helps to remedy those things. It brings, obviously devs and operations together, but more broadly, it's actually about people. It's a human construct, and it's about bringing people together and developing a language that speaks across the different departments within an organisation. So you've got some core economic drivers, and clearly at the same time, you've had some technology developments. In the old days when we used fairly homogeneous architectures and pretty simple stacks, it was a lot easier to keep tabs over an application and over operations. Today, everything's so heterogeneous. You might take a database from here and some cloud infrastructure from here, and a mail management tool from here, and quetch that all together to make yourself an application. And keeping control of that, keeping oversight of that is super difficult. And so that's where one of my core themes when I'm talking about the future, talking about organisations, and frankly also investing, is that I look for fabrics. I look for fabrics that span a bunch of horizontal different areas. And so, as an example, enterprise social networking, Chatter or Yammer or one of those tools is a fabric. It's a fabric that spans a bunch of different business processes and business solutions. And so too with DevOps and with operations and with infrastructure. I'm really excited about platforms that span a bunch of different areas, because the future, frankly, isn't going to look like like one stack, one solution provider, one solution. What it's going to look like is very, very multi-cloud. And so you're going to have people using a bunch of different vendors with a bunch of different tools, and they need some way of gaining insights and controlling all of that. And that's where the Fabric platform comes in.
And do you think, when you think about platform and Fabric versus, say, specific point solutions, how do you reconcile that with sort of the app economy, if you will, right? It's changed with Google and Apple saying, hey, build a very specific app, make it amazing at what it does, and you'll get lots of users. Sorry about that break there, Ben. So as you look out, we talked a little bit about how it relates to sort of Google and Apple, but as you look out into the DevOps world, what are the platform opportunities that you see today? Because I mean, clearly platform opportunities are more game-changing opportunities. So what are the ones that you sort of see?
So I guess there's a few. I mean, the first is, if you, as I said before, if you look at an organization going into the future, it's going to be using a lot of different clouds, or a lot of different infrastructures, not just cloud. So really delivering on that sort of multi-infrastructure scenario by way of monitoring, management. So very broad. The idea is that we're trying to reconcile two things which are kind of diametrically opposed. The first is to encourage and enable bottom-up adoption of the right sort of tools that developers need. But then the other, which is kind of difficult to reconcile with it, is having top-down control and making sure that we do have things in place. And so I think going very broad, having platforms that support the plethora of different vendors that now exist, and giving IT sort of the control and order that they need, then allows developers to come in from underneath and choose the tools that they need, that they want. So those are kind of the platform opportunities. And clearly, we've seen a fairly disaggregated model thus far. We've seen monitoring vendors, we've seen management vendors, we've seen different spend management vendors. Clearly, there's people that say that it's always going to be that way, that the integration's so much easier now, that APIs make it easy to just plug things together. I don't quite see it that way. I think that the reason that we see that much disaggregation at the moment is because we're in a state of rapid change, and in a state of rapid change, people pick off specific solutions and hit them because everything's changing. You can only do so much at one time. But over time, I believe that we're going to see some consolidation, and we're going to see some of those things come together. So if I'm a large Fortune 1000 enterprise, and I want a platform to enable my developers to be agile and to give me my control going into the future, what I want is a platform that gives me monitoring and management and assorted tools all in one, combined.
So how you touched a little bit on top-down control versus bottoms-up sort of decision making and ability to execute. One of the knocks that I've sort of heard on DevOps is that people in the executive suite aren't at major companies aren't going to be excited about giving an individual contributor, developer, the opportunity to change fundamental things about their application. So, yes, rapid prototyping, testing changes, things like that, but how do you kind of respond to that? Because that's a fundamental issue where, there could be all kinds of reasons why you don't do certain things that have nothing to do with technology, but yet, from a development standpoint, that could be possible. So you go ahead and make the change, and, how do you reconcile those two things?
So I think there's two answers to that question. The first answer is that, going forward, the platforms are going to be sufficiently granular that you have the ability to control on a granular basis and to audit on a granular basis and to make sure that the right people make the right changes. But more importantly than that, I think that the reality is that there's a degree of polarization. And so, existing applications, big monolithic applications running on mainframes that are mission critical and that are also very brittle, you need a lot of control over those. You can't have people just kind of rapidly iterating in that situation. And enterprises do have those applications. Moving forward, I guess the C-suite is going to have to balance a couple of things. It's going to balance a little bit of risk for potential reward. We have this difficulty right now that everyone is looking to be agile, but we've got huge compliance burdens upon organizations, which makes it harder to be agile. There's no easy answer to that solution. I think that technology can go so far, and that technology can have broad platforms. Clearly, regulation needs to get more in line with the modern world, and it's got a long way to do for that. And fundamentally, we need to kind of make sure that our people are in a position where the C-suite trusts operatives, and operatives are aware of the ramifications of their actions. So there's a lot of things that need to come together for this to all stick.
Yep. No, that makes sense. So switching gears on you, give me some predictions on, what's going to be successful and effective this year with DevOps. I mean, what's your view at the end of this year, and you're going to look back and say, wow, this is what we accomplished in the world of DevOps?
So I think that I think DevOps, or the DevOps story, or the DevOps movement is being greatly helped now that there are some credible alternatives to AWS. We've got Google, Microsoft. There's now multiple serious pretenders for the crown, if you will. And so while the developers always understood that this needed to occur, this sort of consistency between, or this continuum between developer and operations, we now have a pressing reason for the C-suite to actually embrace this change, because they can see that there's some options out there, and that their world is going to become more complex. But in terms of your question, what are we going to see? I think that my hope is that we see the story very much change from one of being, what tools can I use to achieve DevOps, to, what do we fundamentally need to do with our people in order that the culture is going to be agile. Part of that is DevOps, but I actually think that, DevOps is a great term and all, but DevOps is too narrow a term, because what we're talking here about is organisational culture change. And so I'm hoping that the conversation this year at DevOps Days and other events really broadens to go beyond simply DevOps, to be more about the organisation of the future.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I mean, we definitely hear that too. And the people that we talk to at JumpCloud, just how do you take it up a level and talk about cultural change? Because that's much harder than technology and tool change, if you will. So, what are the impediments that you're seeing to these companies adopting DevOps, and focus on mid-market companies, because we know the startups can adopt DevOps pretty easily, and it's kind of built into the fabric of who they are. But what about the mid-market? What about the enterprises? What's stopping them?
Okay, so there's a bunch of different things. Clearly, there's some compliance issues, and we can't. It's very easy for us to say, "Oh, you should just take risks," but that's hard to do for enterprise. So there's some compliance issues. There's also a lot of FUD that the legacy vendors, if you will, spread around a lot of the stuff. Those terms about trusted enterprise solutions and those sorts of things. And yes, there is a degree of truth in that. And if you're running a mission critical system for a massive organisation, then some sketchy little startup in a garage somewhere doesn't really do it for you. So there is a little bit of justification for that position, but not nearly to the extent that the legacy vendors would indicate. And so I think what we're going to see is, clearly, it's interesting, the FUD will die down as more and more organisations understand that this is the approach that is going to typify the future. We're going to see a lot of consolidation. We're going to see a lot of M&A activity. There's going to be a lot of interesting moves in the space, but I'm picking that we'll see the move towards platforms as opposed to point solutions sooner rather than later, because at the end of the day, I'm not a vendor, but I can imagine that when a vendor's in a sales conversation with a prospect, and it comes down to brass tacks, at the end of the day, if that vendor can tell a story and deliver some functionality and deliver a consistent approach that is platform-like rather than point solution, that's pretty appealing to a prospect who's super busy and really doesn't have the time or the inclination to tie separate solutions together if they can avoid it.
Yep, no, that makes sense. So last question for you, and then I'll let you go. But appreciate the time. Just last fun question: what's caught your eye in DevOps? Could be a technology, could be a company, could be a person who you've really enjoyed talking to. What's sort of caught your eye over the last little bit?
So, it's always fun to watch John Willis, Butch Galoop, what he's saying, and partly because he's entertaining, but he's a great guy. I think in terms of what's caught my eye, I'm really buoyed by the fact that I see startups like JumpCloud and others who are small and sprightly. And in days gone by, small startups like that would have had a huge degree of agility, but would have kind of been a little bit dismissive of enterprise concerns and a little bit of sort of boil the ocean mentality coming through. I'm seeing much more maturity from startups now, and I think DevOps is actually encouraging that maturity, because it's making it imperative that startups, all organisations, but startups in particular, think about both sides of that continuum. So that's a really positive trait, and I think it bodes well for the future of DevOps and the future of the industry more generally.
Great. Ben, thank you very much for taking the time. Appreciate it, and it's always fun to chat with you. So
Awesome.
we'll talk to you again soon.
Cool.
Thank you.